On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Wade Bruce. He's the CTO at Fetch. We're going to be talking about growing into the CTO role, and we're going to kind of touch on a few areas that kind of led into how do you grow into that CTO role, especially if you are at startups. They offer opportunities. A lot of times there's gaps to fill. What should you do in those situations, and how do you create influence and value as you're kind of moving up and trying to show your value so you do get those promotions? Also, we're going to talk about not being fearful of failure. I think that's going to be a good one, and we'll see how much else we could fit into this session with Wade. Thanks for taking the time, Wade.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Before we start, what do you guys do at Fetch?
Yeah, Fetch, we're a mobile app. We're America's rewards app. We basically reward people for their shopping behaviors, buying everyday products, but we also reward people for their time. So can earn points that we have in our system by playing games or doing other activities. And those points you can eventually add up and redeem for gift cards to any number of merchants.
Sounds like people probably have some experience with it, and that's always a good thing. This topic, obviously, we're talking about growing into the CTO role. And I know with your background, I think it's interesting because obviously you've been at Fetch for a little bit of time. You've moved up the ladder. And this conversation kind of got started because I mentioned, obviously, being at one company for half a decade isn't what we're seeing a lot within society. We don't see those long-term stays as much. I guess let's talk about that. And you started off at Fetch. Where did you start off before we could dive into the full discussion?
Yeah, so I came from another startup in the Madison, Wisconsin area. It was an insurtech startup called Bunker. Prior to that, I was at another startup, and they actually closed down that office. So a team of 5 of us went and started this other company. They were looking for engineers. They hired us as a full team, and it was right after their Series A. But eventually, that was kind of winding down, and the writing was on the wall a little bit there. I probably would have stuck around a little longer, but my wife was like 9 months pregnant with our first child. And so I was open to conversations, and Fetch had reached out to me. And I was very interested in staying in the startup space in the first place, but then also another company that was founded in Madison, Wisconsin, my hometown where I grew up, intrigued me. And it was right after one of their raises. And so there was plenty of opportunity and clear growth ahead. So I was excited to join someone that had 1 million active users. That was really exciting to me. We've since grown much from that, but that was the main thing that intrigued me.
And I guess as we're kind of talking about growing into the CTO role, did you join Fetch with aspirations of being a CTO? Was that something that you thought was on your radar at the time?
I mean, like eventually, I think in my mind, I was like, oh, someday it'd be fun to be a CTO. And I was thinking much more in the early phases of a company. So I just come out of a Series A organization, and there was, 30 total people in the company. I don't remember, 7 or 8 engineers. And that was a really fun time. It was really engaging. You're just kind of at the ground roots of it all. And I was excited about that. And so in my mind, I thought, okay, well, I'll work, get some more experience. And someday when the opportunity arises, like I'll go back to a Series A and kind of take a leadership position in that type of company. I never thought I'd be CTO at Fetch. It wasn't on my mind. In fact, when I actually switched from Bunker, I was the engineering manager there. And when I interviewed with Fetch, they're like, hey, we don't really have a need for managers right now. And I was like, well, that's fine. I'm a big fan of just filling the need at startups, and if you need engineers, like I love engineering, and I can do that. So I started as a backend engineer.
I like that. And obviously within the startup world, it's fairly well known. There's different hats, multiple hats. Those are all things that do happen. You mentioned obviously leaving Bunker and going to Fetch. You took a step back from being an engineering manager in a career trajectory to being hands-on. Talk to us about that, because I think sometimes when people become engineering managers, the thought is, I only want to move forward. Some people are a little bit more flexible, but generally society has a very direct, let's go up this ladder until we get to wherever we get to. You actually decide to take a step back. And was that an intentional decision because what Fetch was doing? Was that just, hey, you're just an engineer at heart and like solving problems? What was the driver?
I think even at Bunker, becoming the engineering manager wasn't really a goal of mine. It was just, again, kind of filling a need within the team, within the group. And so I felt like I could do that. And so taking a step back really wasn't, it didn't feel like a step back to me, right? I was just like going back to being an engineer, which I was still writing code at Bunker too. So it wasn't like I was not fresh on that. And I like enjoy that. I think it's fun. I like solving problems. So going back to that wasn't a big issue to me. And I didn't really think much of it, to be totally honest.
Oh, I like it. I mean, I think, you've mentioned a few times filling a need. Obviously, you've demonstrated value. You've demonstrated aptitude. You're being promoted. So I think these are all things that people are hoping for. I think some people come into jobs with intentions of wanting to get someplace, right? I think some people do that. You've mentioned that need component. I guess talk to us a little bit about your philosophy around focusing on filling a need first before you have intention.
Yeah, I guess part of the reason that I'm in startups is because I have kind of an entrepreneurial bug. And I've always found it to be kind of a nice balance of being an entrepreneur, but not having all of the entrepreneurial responsibility of being in a startup. So when it comes to filling the needs of the company, it's really how do we take this thing from nothing and make it into something special? And if I can play a role in that, and maybe it's not the thing I originally thought I was going to be doing, but if I'm good at it and I enjoy it, like I will continue to do that. If it makes us move forward as a group. If I'm not good at it, or I don't get the right type of energy from it, then it's not sustainable. So either I need to hand that off or figure out someone else to take that responsibility. But typically, what I've found is I find a need, I enjoy filling it, I like the responsibility of being part of something that's critical, and then hopefully being successful in accomplishing whatever the goal is.
Yeah, I think it's you articulate it as very plainly and simply, and I think I don't think it's always that easy. I think especially when people are getting to that senior stage, they start thinking ahead. They start thinking about that next step. They start thinking about strategy, and I think the overarching of what I've heard from you is if you actually focus on execution and you do the best job, the other opportunities, they're a byproduct. I guess with that mindset, obviously you have created value. How did the company evaluate that value? Because I think that's the other flip side to this is because we've kind of have a bit of a gamification of career ladders. You're always trying to figure out where is that value? Where do I maximize my value? You're kind of telling us, well, if you find a need and you execute, the value gets produced. That's an interesting dynamic. Maybe talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think part of it's going to be the environment. So the nice thing about Fetch when I joined, and it's still somewhat true, although we almost have 1,000 employees, it's a little different. But if you go into a flat organization that's as flat as possible, then there's not so much of a, hey, there's one role here. And in order to do that thing, you have to like take these steps to get there. And so that was kind of the benefit that I reaped as Fetch grew. It wasn't like there wasn't anybody doing it, A, and then B, like there was no limit on how many people could contribute in that manner. And then I had good leaders as well who didn't care so much about, I don't know, the politics of it all. They just cared about like going out and executing and building stuff. So I had the right support from a leadership perspective as well, which is obviously very helpful for me. And then I think like ultimately there's something about, I call it playing free. So sports teams use that analogy. It's like some team makes the playoffs, but they like barely scraped in and nobody has any expectation for them in the playoffs. So they play free. And then they're the most, sometimes they have these amazing, like successful times in the playoffs. And so like for me, I always try to just kind of center myself around who am I? Well, I'm not defined by my job. I'm not defined by my career. I can add value. I know that to be true. So there's another phrase that's like job security is really just your ability to get your next job. And I've learned that, like I've worked in two environments where I was doing well, but like the company downsized or whatever happened, right? And so I've kind of just leaned into those things. And if I am not defined by my work, I find that I tend to play more free. I just go after things. I'm excited about opportunities and not so focused on like, what if this goes poorly, which is always a real possibility. But if you focus on the potential of it going poorly, I think the odds of it going poorly are actually higher.
I like that. I think that's a great analogy, because I think a lot of times people do go into these situations with what they think is a plan, with what they think is things they should do that benefits them. They err on those. If it doesn't work out, they reevaluate the situation. When it does work out, they attribute it to, oh, I was very strategic. And I think a lot of times what you've mentioned, that combination of, filling that need, that value, obviously becoming trusted, right? I think that their lends influence to the trust. I think those things go hand in hand. I joke with people. I go, if people don't recommend restaurants to other people that are not really good, that haven't been consistent. If you go one time to one place, you go, I'm not sure I'm really going to recommend it yet. You're not sure, that trust isn't there. I think there's a component to maybe what you're talking about where you are filling that need, you're showing value, and there's a trust that goes into Wade, and they're like, we trust this person to deliver. Why not give him or her that opportunity? Now, getting that opportunity is fantastic. Taking advantage of it is a whole different thing, especially if you're moving up the career ladder. And I guess my question to you is, as you've moved up the career ladder, you have to kind of add those skills. You have to build on the skills that you previously were weak in or didn't have. How do you do that simultaneously while still filling a need, focusing on value and whatnot?
Yeah, I think part of it is hopefully I recognize the things I'm not good at, and then I surround myself with people that are good at those things. And again, it's about what gives them energy too. And so if you find the right people to fill those things, then you can still holistically be successful. As far as like kind of stepping into more leadership opportunities, for me, I have a background. I did ROTC in college. I spent some time in the Army National Guard in leadership roles. And so I kind of had a foundation of what I believe to be leadership, what I thought was good leadership, what I thought was bad. I had plenty of examples of both, and you can learn from both for sure. So I tried to take those things and apply them. And that part, I guess, was a little less of a stretch that I felt. Like I didn't feel that stretch too much. I think the hardest thing about my current job of being like a CTO is there's tech still moves super fast. I'm not writing code every day. And so staying in touch with those things is really, really difficult. But again, if I can find the right engineers like surround myself with and the right other leaders that have expertise in certain areas, then holistically we'll still be successful as a group.
And actually, maybe a follow-up question for you is, you are CTO. There's not, I'm sure there's not a whole lot of other places you can move up into at this point. Maybe there's one other role, but yeah, that's a whole different conversation. At this level, trying to find and fill that need, obviously there's a big delegation, there's a different, lens and sphere of influence you have. How do you apply that same mindset, or do you apply that same mindset, and how do you go by doing that?
Yeah, now I think I focus on being in the right details. So I can't be in every detail, right? I just can't. There's a couple hundred people that are working on tech, and I don't know what they're all doing, but I try to focus on like, where can I add or contribute the most value right now? Maybe take the burden off of somebody in some sort of way. And I try to focus my energy towards those things. So for me as a leader in a software company who has other leaders that report to me, I tell my team all the time, I don't want to be a place where we have non-technical leaders leading technical people. And so one of the requirements of being a leader within the tech org at Fetch is you have to contribute technically. Now, a good number of our managers still write code. So first line managers, a good number of them do that. Some of them are a little bit further removed, some of the VPs, but they're driving very specific projects and they're aligned to something very specific to engineering. So they're bringing engineering talent in some way to the company. And so I think individual contributors want that. Like if you're an IC in a software company writing software, you want a manager that understands what you're working on, that can help you think about problems in different ways. And so that's typically where we're focusing now, is like where can I add the most value in the current moment, which changes, right? Like quarter to quarter, month to month, it's not always the same thing. We have some big projects coming up here in 2 months. And so like right now, most of my energy is going into thinking about that, helping and supporting there as best I can, and then letting some other stuff go because you just can't do everything.
Yeah, it's obviously, what got you there necessarily has to change, right? What got you there isn't always going to carry you through. And I'm kind of hearing, yes, you obviously had to focus on the need. Now it's a whole different skill set. That skill set development, obviously, as you mentioned, having great support, great managers, all those things. As you're looking to develop those skills, you talk about playing free and doing things you haven't done before. I think playing free and obviously having done things before, you have a certain confidence. Moving into areas you haven't, how do you maintain that playing free mindset, but also realizing failure is obviously potentially there?
I think it helps. Again, I have our CEO Wes. He's a good leader, and he's also very open to continuing to learn and continuing to try different things. So we take a lot of big swings as a company. So our environment and our culture, it's okay to take a big swing, and sometimes those don't work out. Like sometimes they fail, and you just learn from those things. So I think that helps first and foremost, because it feels like I'm in an environment where that's like the expectation and the desire. And then for me personally, I think it's also about having that open mind, right? Like just, and being open to say like, I don't know, right? Let's figure this out. I don't have the answer to this today, but we can learn this. We're all here learning stuff. So that's the way I try to approach it. Is I might not know today, but like we can work through it. We'll figure it out. We're all smart people. And if we just spend enough energy into the system, like we'll get the result that we want.
I think actually that's something I think sometimes is lacked within employment, is that people don't always feel secure, and because of that they don't always make an optimal decision. That fear component's big. So I actually love the fact that you mentioned you could take some big swings and miss, and it being okay. Your team, when you actually are trying to make sure, obviously you work with the CEO, you see that firsthand. To get that IC, to get that first line manager to buy into that, to really know if we do something that doesn't work out, my job isn't on the line. How do you help them understand that? Because I think that's a bit of a secret sauce to ensuring that level of comfort, is that everyone through the org, top down, bottom up, they all feel that.
So our focus with my team is to help people grow. And really when somebody's like in trouble or at risk in terms of their tenure being done at Fetch, comes to, are they not growing either at the steep enough trajectory, or are they not growing at all? It's like one of those two things. If someone is continually growing, like they're good to go. And the company is always going to be continuing to get better. So 5 years ago, engineering wasn't nearly as strong as it is today. Same with a year ago. We're getting better every month, right? And you have to grow with the company. And some people will grow at the rate of the company. Some people will grow quicker than the company. And some people will grow slower than the company. And you might be an A player at one point. And as the company evolves, if you don't continue on that trajectory, like eventually you kind of work your way towards the bottom, and you're probably coming close to end of tenure, which isn't a bad thing, right? I think like someday Fetch will probably outgrow me, and that's okay. Like that's a good thing. And so if people focus on growing, and we say holistic growing, so like when you join Fetch and you leave, I want you to be better, mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally, better at your job, financially. Like if we were focused on that holistic person and help them grow, and they're doing that, like that's what I care about. And so yeah, you might have some failures. That's going to happen. Nobody's perfect. But if you're static, that's where the problem is.
I like that. If you were to look back, and I guess, you if we had the benefit of hindsight, which I don't actually fully believe in, but if we did have the benefit of hindsight, you go back and tell early career Wade one takeaway of the things you've learned through this journey of, becoming a CTO, various stops along the way, obviously lots of good decisions. Is there something that you would tell early career Wade, what to do when he's approaching this?
I mean, I get the question from like college students a lot. How do you get to become a CTO? That kind of thing. And usually I actually lean on the growth thing. And I tell people, especially out of school, it's really about trajectory. Like you're not going to really know much coming out of school, but if you have a really steep trajectory, which you should, that's what I would focus on. And as you get further along in your career and you plateau, because as an individual, you will plateau at some point, then it's really about impact and how do you work with other people to kind of create that perception of trajectory, even though really it's like you're leveraging the people around you to do that. But I think ultimately, again, it's really about like if you can become confident in who you are as an individual and you're not like emotionally attached to your job in that way. Like I care a lot about what I do and I really want Fetch to be successful for many, many reasons. But at the end of the day, again, it doesn't define me. And if my tenure, my time is up at Fetch at some point, like that's okay. I have good skills. I can apply them elsewhere and just take confidence in that and be happy with the rest of my life, which is, really what defines me.
I actually think that's excellent advice. I think people do see their self-worth in their job sometimes. And I think consultants actually have the benefit of knowing they're going to move around, and they come in and they can offer their advice because they know they're not sticking around. They're going to give the best advice, like it or not. That's what they're there for. And I think sometimes as we go through our careers, we're so worried about the steps and how it actually moves forward that we're not doing what you've been saying. And I think that's what I'm taking away is if you move all that stuff off your shoulders and you start thinking about the actual work, the actual execution, some of the other things actually will take care of themselves. And I think everything you've said has been fantastic. Great advice as well. I'm sure we haven't covered all things that have gone into your career. So I know, obviously we have a limited time with you and I really do appreciate it. If somebody does have a follow-up question, obviously within the lens of growing into a CTO role and kind of how that's been, is there a good way of connecting with you to follow up with you?
Yeah, I think LinkedIn would be a great way to connect with me. I'm available on there. I'm present on there. So please shoot me a message. Happy to chat.
Fantastic. We'll make sure to put that in the show notes. Wade, thanks for being on. I really do appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Amir. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. All right, that's the end of this episode. We'll be back again, different guest, different topic. Until then, two things. One, please share this episode with somebody who is interested in either moving into a CTO role, moving up the career ladder, or just they want to learn a little bit more in terms of how Wade has gone about building his career. Some great advice. My takeaway is don't worry about the outcome. Focus on execution. Focus on showing value. Address the needs in the company and let the things take care of themselves that will take care of themselves. And actually, also important, you got to be in the right environment. I think you have to recognize that you're in that right environment. So you need a little bit of all those pieces. But please share this episode out. I thought it was great content. Hopefully you guys can find value in it. Also like, subscribe, comment. Let me know how the podcast is going for you. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.